So let's take a look then at some of these voice leading principles that I'm referring to. If we are in the key of B flat, as was the piece we were just looking at, the one chord is of course B flat, D, F. As I mentioned, from the classic period, the primary root movements from the classical period would have been root movements based in fourths or fifths. So let's say we were going to move from B flat down a perfect fifth to E flat, and let's take a look at this voice leading. If we move every note to its closest possible voice, we're looking for an E flat G B flat, which gives us a common tone, and then we can have E flat and G, which gives us a movement of step and half step to get from that chord, the first chord, to the second chord. So we have a common tone, a movement of step, and a movement of half step. Let's say we go up a fifth instead of down a fifth. Then we're looking for F, A, C, and we have a common tone of F, and we have an A and a C, and we have a half step movement, and we have a step movement. So if we go from B flat a fifth in either direction, either down or up, we have a voice leading paradigm of common tone, and then half step, and then whole step. Either direction, common tone, half step, and whole step. So let's take a look now and see what happens when we move this chord by thirds, this B flat D F chord by thirds, and let's take a look at the voice leading and see how it compares to what was done in the past. First we'll look at moving this chord a minor third in either direction. So if we move a minor third away and we keep the quality major, we're looking for a D flat, F, A flat, and we can have a common tone doing it this way, D flat, F, A flat, and you'll see that we have the same voice leading paradigm from the past. We have a common tone, and a half step movement, and a whole step movement. The same could be said if we went a minor third down to G, B, D. We can have a common tone D, and a G, and a B, and we would have a step motion and a half step motion. So we have a common tone, half step, step, common tone, half step, step, when we move minor thirds away. In the same way that as we moved fourths or fifths away, we have a common tone, half step, step. So the voice leading, doing this sort of progression minor thirds away, is exactly the same kind of voice leading as the past, although the harmony is quite different and the sound is quite different. As these composers were thinking through these things, they found an even more closely related voice leading connection if they moved in major thirds rather than minor thirds. So if we move a major third up or a major third down, the voice leading becomes even closer related. So D, F sharp, A has a common tone, but now instead of having a whole step and a half step, we have two half steps. You can do the same thing of major third down, G flat, B flat, D flat, common tone, and 2 half-step motions. So that while this connection with the half-step, common tone, whole step would be the paradigm, this is even closer in voice leading than the other because it has 2 half-step motions with 1 common tone. All right, let me let you hear some of the things I've been talking about. In the classic period, the primary root movement is fourths and fifths. So if we start on our B flat and we go down a perfect fifth, which is the same as up a fourth, we get B flat to E flat. And we will have a half step motion and a whole step motion and a common tone. Of course, the bass moves down a perfect fifth or up a perfect fourth, but these other voices have a common tone and then a half step and a whole step motion. Let's say we go B flat to F, which is up a perfect fifth or down a perfect fourth, and we do this way. We have the same idea. We have a common tone. We have one note that moves by whole step, one note that moves by half step, and the bass moves a fourth or a fifth away. The late Romantic composers, using the same concepts of voice leading, began to move in thirds instead of fourths or fifths. So if you take the same B flat and you move a minor third away to a major chord, we can go from B flat to D flat, and it would sound like this. Very different sound in this time, these motions by thirds, but the same voice leading principles apply. If you have B flat D F, in the right hand, in this case, the F is a common tone. One voice moves by half step, one voice moves by whole step. You could also go a major third down instead of up, and you would go down to, minor third is what we're doing. So you could also go a minor third down, and you would go B flat to G. And you have the same voice leading principle here. From B flat D F, you have a common tone, one note that moves by whole step, one note that moves by half step. Now, an even more closely related in terms of voice leading chord motion is the major third motion. B flat D F moving to D major requires 2 half step motions and no whole step motions. So you have a common tone, and then these voices move half steps, so you'd have this sound, which is also a very interesting sound. And you could go, so that's B flat up a major third to D. If you go down a major third to G flat, you would have this. The same idea, but now this note becomes a common tone, and these two move by half step. Now I showed you the voice leading principles involved here when moving from B flat to D to G flat to B flat, and that in this case there are 2 half step motions and a common tone as you move from each of these chords or keys to the next. But there's another thing I want you to notice about this, and that's the harmonic motion itself. So we'll zoom out a little bit away from voice leading and look at harmony. If Bach, for example, wanted to move from B flat and move through a cycle of chord progressions to get to B flat again, he would have gone down in perfect fifths. And so he would have had to move through B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B, E, A, D, G, C, and F before he could ever get back home to B flat. he would have had to essentially move through 12 different keys in order to get from B flat through a cycle of perfect fifths down to get back home. Now, what Hugo Wolf does is, instead of moving down in perfect fifths, he moves up in major thirds, and in doing that, his circle consists of only 3 different chords or keys before he gets back home. So what he's done here is he's taken the octave and divided it evenly into major third increments, which, if you just look at this, would compose an augmented triad, which is an equal division of the octave, whereas the perfect fourth is not an equal division of the octave in half. It's not quite half, or else you would go half and then be home. The tritone is actually the midpoint between B flat and B flat. But if you move in fourths, you end up moving in 12 keys. If you take the octave and divide it into equal parts, you can get a major third, major third, major third, and then you're back home. And so this is another reason why Hugo Wolf and some of his contemporaries began to move in major thirds, is because you can do a harmonic sequence and you can get back to where you started fairly quickly.